Colt returned to Hartford and showed his parents the fortune he'd found at sea. They were not impressed by his flimsy pieces of wood, and they urged him to sign on for a 30-month whaling voyage. Sam insisted he was onto something big. He persuaded his father to advance a local gunsmith $15 for working models of a pistol and rifle. In 1832, Sam took these prototypes to Washington to show his father's friend Henry Ellsworth, who also happened to be the U.S. Commissioner of Patents. Ellsworth's valuable advice to young Sam was not to apply for a patent until he'd improved the experimental models, but to establish priority by taking out a legal caveat specifying his intention to do so while leaving the prototypes in the patent office. To pay for a really good gunsmith, 17-year-old Sam bolstered his finances by inviting people to make fools of themselves. Working with the chemist in the Ware textile factory, he'd learned of the mood-altering qualities of nitrous oxide, or laughing gas. He ingeniously made a portable lab and reinvented himself on the Lyceum and Fairground circuit as the celebrated Dr. Colt, C-O-U-L-T, of New York, London and Calcutta. He offered sniffs of the stuff at 50 cents a time. He made $10 a day, but he spent $11 a day, another perennial feature of his mode of operating until he became rich. In 1834, Colt moved to Baltimore to be amid a large population of mechanics. Colt's alliances there were a perfect expression of the symbiosis of his business career. Joseph Walker was a fly-by-night musical impresario who staged performances by Dr. Colt. John Pearson was a capable gunsmith Colt invited to make prototypes of repeating firearms. When Dr. Colt went on the road to keep the enterprise afloat, Colt left Walker in charge and nagged him from afar with detailed queries and orders. On February 25, 1836, Colt tore open a big brown manila envelope to find his American patent number 138. Pearson's work had been so good, he later claimed he was the true inventor, that Colt was ready to manufacture revolvers and rifles in quantity. He borrowed $1,000 from his father. His cousin Dudley Selden, a New York lawyer, invested, and so did 33 others, mainly family members and friends, to a total of $230,000, about $17 million today. On March the 5th, Selden, the designated treasurer and general manager, oversaw a bill in the New Jersey legislature incorporating the Patent Arms Manufacturing Company. The very next day, at San Antonio, the 187 Texans and Tennesseans fighting for an independent republic were all dead at the Alamo, and General Santa Anna's triumphant Mexican army was marching north to subdue the American colonies in East Texas. It looked a propitious moment to launch a gun manufactory. Nevertheless, the cousins soon fell out. Colt had been unable to get Pearson to work with them, so they'd hired Pliny Lawton, a manager in the woolen textile factory in Ware, where his father worked. Lawton, unfamiliar with special-purpose metalworking machine tools, found it difficult to adapt Pearson's craftsmanship to volume production. And over Selden's objections, Colt kept hindering that by tinkering with the design of what was now a 5-shot revolver, as well as the first product to be made, an 8-shot revolving rifle. Colt was also ready to spend much more of the investors' money in pursuit of the only potential for mass-market sales at that time, the U.S. military. At 22, he was now an impressive, handsomely bearded man, powerfully built like his father, and he bustled through every door in Washington, lobbying politicians and bureaucrats in the cause of equipping the army with his guns. He wangled an audience with President Andrew Jackson to show off his repeating rifle, his main focus then, but Jackson was too much enamored of the single-shot flintlocks of his battle days. Colt threw himself lavishly into social life in Washington, drinking mightily with any politicians he thought might help him. Selden was particularly enraged when he learned that Colt had pawned some of the display weapons to support this drinking. He wrote, "I know not what you may think of the morals of this business, but it seems to me not much better than putting your hand in a man's pocket." End quote. He threatened to have his cousin arrested. Colt talked his way out of trouble, as usual. When the Army held competitive gun trials at West Point in the summer of 1837, Colt's wild public relations exercises in Washington had worked well enough to secure a place for him. A few of the Patterson guns, however, were less successful than his lobbying. One exploded on June the 21st, and the Army Ordnance Board concluded that though Colt's repeaters might be usefully applied in special cases, it would be imprudent for them to abandon the standard single-shot, breech-loading flintlock musket and pistol. Colt's Patterson weapons did have serious production flaws. Multiple discharges, caused when the ignition flame or powder discharge spread to other chambers, were apt to be injurious or even lethal. The revolvers were hard to dismantle with too many parts, and they often clogged. And Colt's long arms had even more production defects. A Marine in Florida had been killed testing a rifle. His commanding officer wrote to Colt and the War Department to say Colt's concept was admirable, but the manner of manufacture was infamous. Colt wasn't blind to these flaws. His efforts to resolve them were one of the reasons production was interrupted for changes. He was, at the same time, utterly unscrupulous. He asked Selden for money to bribe officials, which appalled his cousin. "The suggestion with respect to Colonel Bomford," Selden said, "is dishonourable in every way." The Patterson directors were right to be suspicious of the extravagances and ethical flexibility of the company's young founder, but they were wrong to assume that their guns would sell themselves. In Florida, soldiers of the 2nd Dragoons and settlers were fighting a losing guerrilla war against Indians resisting deportation from their ancestral lands. Lieutenant Colonel William S. Harney wrote the Patent Arms Company with an urgent request to try out 100 repeating rifles. Colt's immediate impulse was to board a steamer for Florida and take the guns with him. The directors were deeply concerned that he might just pawn the company property to pay his bills, and they said he couldn't go. As usual, Colt was deaf to the word. The rifles went with him when he boarded a steamer to Camp Jupiter, near present-day Palm Beach.